Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Guys, this is the real deal. If you are an original Panerai, if you remember the old movement, which was online, organic, and driven by collectors more than the brand itself, the fervor of enthusiasm that swelled up in the late 90s around Panerai.com and the fraternity of people who discovered these things almost by accident, almost in spite of the company itself. This is going to be your kind of watch, a real throwback to the halcyon days of Panerai as a cult classic brand. You are looking at a 2006 Panerai Luminor 1950 Submersible PAM00243. So this was the successor to watches like the PAM004, a timepiece that is a no-holds-barred utilitarian watch with genuine tritium patina, a feel in the hand like a bank vault, like it's indestructible. There is nothing contrived here. It is absolutely tool watch to the nth degree, and it's still the real deal. So, of course, a little bit different than watches like the PAM87 and 64. You can see here that we've got the 1950 case that debuted in the modern era back in 2002 on the PAM127. The watch is large. The PAM243 is a 44 millimeter case that's 18.5 millimeters thick, and then from lug tip to lug tip 54 millimeters. And it's got a 24 millimeter span between the lugs. Now, the thing about Panerai watches is I tend to say measure them by the case-to-case span, not the lug-to-lug. So when this watch is on the wrist, it's 44 millimeters across, but it's also 44 millimeters across the wrist. The lugs are so minimal that they're really not part of the aesthetic. If the watch case is contained within the span of your wrist, you can consider it to be a fit, because my wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, and this both feels and looks right. Remember, it's not supposed to look like a date just on your wrist. This is a Luminor's 1950 Submersible, big as the look. And the timepiece is very comfortable on this caoutchouc style strap, rubber with a little bit of a bellows to offer flexibility, and then on the bottom some hollows to let the wrist breathe. You can see Panerai factory strap, brand new, no crimping, no gouging. I'd actually recommend this watch for a wrist of 16 centimeters circumference and up. Panerai's well-known trapezoidal pin buckle right here, and then old school once more, the way the buckle and the case are fixed to the strap, we have screws and bars. Screws and bars. So if you are part of the old guard of the Panerai, you probably already have the tools in-house to jump into strap swapping here, and you're going to have an absolute ball, because you will find that there are more OEM and aftermarket options, including full custom for Panerai, than for any other brand in history. Yes, even AP. Yes, even Rolex. So we have a case now that is different from the Alessandro Bettorini case of the 1990s. Of course, the old Panerai company that first launched civilian models in 1993 came up with a very rectilinear, almost dumpster-like profile. Some people call it a tuna can, but it's basically just a little square that has vertical case lines, and it doesn't have a whole lot of organic flow to it, whereas this 1950 case is designed to look a little bit more like the actual historic 6152 combat watches. So while it's still bulky and blocky and evocative of tools rather than fine instruments, nevertheless, it does feel a little bit more graceful, or at the very least, something that's truer to the heritage of the company. Now, of course, 1,000 meters water resistant. We also have a helium escape valve for saturation divers, and the crown guard here is probably the most distinctive part of any dive watch ever made, really any sports watch ever made. And of course, that crown guard, you cover up the whole watch. You know it's a Luminor. You know it's a Panerai, the most distinctive crown guard in history. And there is a purpose here. Back in the late 40s, when this was being developed, the Panerai cases were made by Rolex. And so the Rolex Oyster case had a crown that you would screw out and in continuously. And because they were manual wind watches, you had to do that pretty much every day. So the idea was to reduce the wear and tear on the stem assembly as well as the crown seals. Just compress and decompress the crown. So as soon as you lift the lever, you can wind, you can activate if you wish, hacking seconds, or you can fire up the quick set system. And you can do all that just by lifting the lever. And it's really hard to jump into the water with the crown unlocked because unlike a screw down crown, which might be out 2 or 3 threadings and leak, that could be hard to see. This is almost impossible to miss. Plus, it gives you more protection than shouldered crown guards because if it gets hit perpendicular, you're still protected. There's also a little lobe in there. It's a cam-based system, so decompress, recompress, just like that. The bezel, super chunky. .60 click, looks good, feels good, sounds good. Of course, we've got the matching tritium bezel pearl here. You've got a 0 to 60 minute count-up timer, and I've always loved dive bezels because I find them easier to read than chronos without the downstream maintenance costs of a chrono. Genuine, honest-to-God tritium fade dial. That T is not ornamental. This is the real thing, guys. And we'll do a loom shot just so you can distinguish here between the different parts of the dial. And I have to assure you that it will fade very quickly. So once you leave it in the dark for a little bit, what you'll realize is that the tritium dial quickly loses its luminescence. So if you have any doubts, let them be allayed. That dial disc is the real deal. Now, magnifier over the dial, and on the case back you can see I series. This model was introduced in 2006. That corresponds to I. You can see they made 500 that year. Divers Professional, indeed. This is a canister of steel around the Panerai caliber OP3, which is basically a Valjoux 7750 with the chronograph components removed. So it's a 7750 P1. It's a unidirectional automatic winder. It's got a 4 Hertz beat rate, hacking seconds, quick set date, pivots on 21 pivot joules, has the 42-hour reserve 5-position adjustment, and a COSC chronometer certification. It is tough, it is very precise, and it is exactly the kind of engine you would expect in a utilitarian, no-holds-barred tool watch like this. So if you love this watch, which is now starting to look and feel like a genuine vintage piece, be advised that authentic, unretrofitted tritium dial Panerai divers are now super collectible. And if you're wondering how a tritium dial could have appeared as late as 2006, you have to understand that the Panerai Luminor submersible divers continued to use tritium for years after the rest of the Panerai line went over to Luminova. The idea being if you pulled it out of a dive locker, you wouldn't have to charge it up in the light. If you pulled it out in the middle of the night, it would be self-activated and glowing. But since tritium has a half-life of about 12.4 years, by this point, just about all of them have faded, creating a wonderful, almost orange-toned, almost, one might say, sunblock-toned tritium patina that is spectacular on the style and no two are alike. Reach out to Team Mosso at the1916company.com for pricing and availability details.